Hello everyone and welcome to the Council of Elrond, where we discuss all things Lord of the Rings, and today we have a special treat for you because we are going to discuss, in case you didn't know, Tolkien's unfinished sequel to The Lord of the Rings entitled The New Shadow. And maybe we'll discuss something a little secret again at the end of this episode, if we have time. I don't know. We'll have to see. But don't forget to leave a like, drop us a review as well. That really helps us with the algorithm. Also check us out on YouTube because we're trying to grow on YouTube too, very slowly but surely. You can find all of our links there in the description in the podcast info section. I am Dave, your host, and I'm joined by my brother, Johnny.
Hello.
And also, before we begin, a huge thank you to all of our patrons and a special mention to Jack Knightley. You know who you are, Jack, and we love you very, very much. So yeah, let's get into this episode.
Give it to us raw and wriggling.
Johnny, I know you know that there was an unfinished sequel to The Lord of the Rings, as we've previously discussed it off air before, but do you happen to, I don't expect you to, but do you remember anything much of what happened in it, or even just like what the look of Middle Earth was like in this period of the Fourth Age?
I can't really remember. It's so long since, just in case anyone's listening, you just mentioned that we discussed it off air. About a week ago, we had a conversation of like, you were saying, oh, maybe I might do an episode to talk about this. That was our conversation. The extent of the conversation was about like 7 seconds. So we didn't go in any depth into it. But I remember a few years ago reading something about it, and I really don't have a good memory. I think there was some sort of like a evil, shady character, almost kind of like it was almost like a Nazgul or something. Like maybe it could have been like a dark sorcerer or something that was just kind of popping up around the place, like in the Shire or something. But maybe I'm just getting that completely wrong. So I can't tell you.
You sound like, I remembered nothing from it. And again, I don't know, maybe a year or 2 years ago, I think I watched a video on it. It was probably Matt from Nerd the Rings or one of those videos describing this book. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I remember watching it and forgetting it almost immediately. But from what you've brought up, you're kind of getting close. So the book is called The New Shadow. So what do we know about this book? Well, first of all, let's just talk a little bit about Tolkien. So Tolkien actually began thinking about a sequel to The Lord of the Rings in the late 1950s or early 60s. We don't know exactly when he first began, but he actually started writing this story 3 times, but eventually abandoned it after never being able to get further than just a few pages in. But the version that we have available is 13 pages long, and it's in the Peoples of Middle Earth. You've heard of this book, John? Mm-hmm. You have it? For anyone that doesn't know about this, it's a book that's edited by Christopher Tolkien, the son of John, from the unpublished manuscripts of his father. And the story is set 220 years after the events of Lord of the Rings. That's what I could gather. Anyways, that seems to be the most accurate time frame because, again, we've talked about it loads of times before, but Tolkien has contradicted himself many times, saying things like, about 100 years after the downfall of Barad-dûr, he says that in one letter, and then another letter he says, oh, it's about 100 years after the death of Aragorn. So that doesn't make sense because that's like 100 years.
Sure, it's an unfinished story. So obviously we know that the way Tolkien used to write was he'd just start, he'd get an idea and he'd start writing it, and then he'd let the story just kind of develop itself a little bit almost, and then if he didn't like the way it was going, he'd just kind of scrap it and start over again. So, he used to always just come up with like random ideas. That's why, and then all the books like the Silmarillion, things like that were put together by Christopher, which were just kind of assembled by just finding these notes and like scraps of paper with like things written on them. It's so difficult to assemble those things, and then that's why there are some contradicting storylines and not storylines, but maybe contradictions like Blue Wizards, timelines, things like that. Because obviously, if Tolkien had finished those stories himself, maybe would have had a more consistent thing. But he had too much work. He had too much going on. He was trying to adapt an entire world, and some stuff got left by the wayside, and he couldn't keep track of it all.
Yeah, and it's not even just like little contradictions. You kind of said there that he would go back and like look at his own notes and years later make a complete change. I think we talked about it before on the Orc episode or some episode where he just like decided to on his deathbed be like, oh, by the way, Orc is actually spelled O-R-K. Goodbye. Just like left a bombshell and then disappeared. But so set about 220 years after the events of Lord of the Rings. What we know is it's only a couple of generations, like maybe 2 in, some of the longer living men. But at this point, like all magic is gone. All memory of what happened in the Lord of the Rings is all but gone as well. Elves have completely left the continent. Dwarves have now delved so deeply and so greedily that they have all but vanished from society, and they're basically lost to the world of men. There's no mention of it. Like if Tolkien was going to finish the story, it wouldn't have been high fantasy. It would have been like low fantasy. There would have been no elves, dwarves, magic, any of that crap. Middle Earth is under the dominance and rule of men. And this story is that like the text is written from the perspective of our main character named Borlas. Borlas is the youngest son of Beregond. Now, Beregond is a name that we see in the Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King book. I was going to ask you, do you actually remember who this character is? You would see him in Gondor. So, to jog your memory,
we're going to need some help.
He meets Pippin at Minas Tirith. Do you remember this guy? Now, he doesn't have a huge part.
Is he just like one of the Citadel guards or something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he had recently just become a Citadel guard, and
is he the guy that meets Pippin and Gandalf when they're coming through the gate? It's not that guy, is it? There's a guy. It's like right at the beginning of the Return of the King book where Gandalf and Pippin are arriving and they're coming through the 7 gates, and Gandalf is there saying like, and they speak to Gandalf and they're like, well, Mithrandir, you know the passwords of the 7 gates, but we don't know your friend. And Gandalf is like, oh, I can vouch for him. I can go to Denethor and I can vouch for him. It's not that guy, no?
No, that's at the Ramus Ekor actually, before they actually get to...
Ekor,
he's like just some... I don't know. That guy only has like one mention in the book, and I can't remember his name. We brought it up before on this, but yeah, he's just some.
Because Gandalf, it's cool because he's like he has this little like it's. You can imagine if it was a movie and there was an actor, he's like, oh, I got this small little part. I've got a speaking role, but he has a couple of lines. A couple of lines with Ian McKellen, a couple of lines with Gandalf, and he says, and then Gandalf says to him like, basically, war is coming, really, really soon. So because and that's why. It's really cool because in that part of the book, the guy calls Mithrandir. No, he doesn't call him Lath Spell or anything like that. But he basically, the way that we know the rumor about Gandalf in those times around the world of men, especially, he was known to be just the bringer of bad news. That's why Wormtongue calls him Lath Spell, and he says ill news is an ill guess and all that kind of stuff. He basically says that, like, Gandalf's kind of famous for just arriving when shit's going down and he's always bringing bad news. But Gandalf's basically saying like, yeah, I am bringing bad news, but there's a war about to come. And that's why he tells the guy, make sure that you finish building this wall, because it was like the final wall of the 7 where the gates are. And the guy's like, okay, by tomorrow morning, that wall's going to be finished. And he's like, good man yourself, carry on. That's verbatim, good man yourself.
I remember we brought up that guy before because he has some quote for our episode when we were discussing the Pelennor Fields and we were discussing the Ramus Ekor and the seven gates, or possibly the Minas Tirith episode. That guy has a quote where he talks about 7 gates, and it's not very clear in the book. Is he currently talking about the Ramus Ekor, or is he talking about the 7 gates of Minas Tirith? But anyways, that's another character that's not the same guy. But this guy, Beregond...
Sorry, that's what I do when I don't know the answer to your question. I kind of go, look what I know about some other guy.
Yeah, exactly. But back to Beregond. So Beregond, he meets Pippin at Minas Tirith. In the book it says that he has recently just become a guard at the Citadel, and he's actually the one that kills 3 servants of Denethor in order to protect Faramir being burned alive after Pippin rushed to ask for his aid. So in the book, Pippin like runs to his little friend that he meets, and he's like, Beregond, help! Denethor's going insane. It's kind of like what Gandalf does, I suppose, in the films.
Yeah, Gandalf just takes that role on in the movie.
He takes that role. Mm-hmm. And also he's mentioned again when they're fighting at the Morannon, He's fighting side by side with Pippin. But anyways, so this character Beregond, he's alive at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, but this book is centered around his son, his youngest son, named Borlas. And Borlas in this time is now an old man. With an old name diversity. What in the hell is diversity?
It's so funny, anytime you mention these names of like Beregond and Borlas and stuff, because they're just not such familiar names as any of the other main characters of Lord of the Rings, and I've kind of forgotten about some of those guys. It's like it reminds me of any characters from a Lord of the Rings PlayStation game or something like thinking. The Third Age.
Third Age, it's Berethor, isn't it? That's the name of the character that you play as.
Is it
Elgost as well? Is the ranger?
What's the female dwarf's name? Like
Idril, it's like I think
Idril. Yeah, I remember it'd be like part of like it's Galadriel. Like I remember thinking like it's like if you take the name Galadriel and just chop off a few letters, you get this like Idril or Adriel or something like that.
I think it's Idril, and then there's Elgost, the ranger, Benethor or Berethor.
What's the dwarf's name?
Oh God, what is he? If anyone's listening, please let us know what the dwarf's name is.
I really want to play that game.
And do you remember there was also a girl with two? She had like 2 axes. She was a Rohirrim girl. I can't remember what her name was.
Did she come along later?
Oh, she comes later. Yeah. I can't remember her name, but she's like akimbo axes. It's pretty cool.
Oh, class! That's deadly. Yeah.
But anyways, brilliant game. I highly recommend if anyone hasn't played it, get out a PS2 and find the Third Age. It's such a good game, Final Fantasy style. Anywho, we all know the Lord of the Rings ends with Aragorn ruling over the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor for 122 years. And he was a wise and great ruling king, and he was eventually succeeded by his son named, do you remember his name?
Sorry, who?
Aragorn's son.
Oh, right. Sorry, I was just thinking about something completely different. I wasn't really listening to you.
Get your mind out of the Third Age.
Yeah, I'll try to think of that dwarves name. Aragorn's. Oh God, I'm gonna go blank on this.
It'll come to me, that dwarf's name. You're thinking of Aragorn's son. I'm thinking of the dwarf.
Hang on,
I think I have it. I think I know the dwarf's name. Is it Hadhod?
I think you're very close. I think that sounds a bit too weird. A bit too like.
I think it's Hadhod. I'm going to Google it.
Hadhod? Really?
Hadhod? Hadhod? Hadhod.
Sounds like a crumpet or something. Hadhod. Like a hot pocket.
Yeah, I don't. Oh yeah, I think I'm right. Hadhod is part of the company of travelers controlled by the player in the Lord of the Rings, the Third Age video game. There you go.
Oh my God, how did you remember that? Hadhod. It doesn't even sound like. I mean, when you said it, I was like, "That's definitely not it."
But I'm just putting on a brave face for the audience.
No, as in it sounded right when you were saying it begins with a H kind of thing. I was like, all right, fair enough, maybe, yeah, but I didn't expect that. Hadhod, right? Well done, fair play.
So
brilliant.
Aragorn's
son, I'm going blank on Aragorn's son's name.
That's all right. His name was Eldarion.
Oh, for feck's sake! God, yeah.
So Eldarion ruled. He succeeded Aragorn after Aragorn eventually passed away, and I think it's widely known that, or widely, whoever read the end of the book or the next bits of Tolkien's notes, that Eldarion was also a wise and ruling king as well, or a great king, but maybe not as great as his father. And perhaps if Aragorn was ruling for another 100 years, he would have made sure nobody would have forgotten the torment that Sauron had on Middle Earth. But Eldarion was a little bit more. I don't really care if people know or forget. But anywho, let's get on to the actual story, the meat and bones. The meat and bones. So the story begins.
Give it to me.
With give it to me raw.
Raw.
And wriggling.
Yeah.
So the story.
Give it to me raw.
The story begins with Borlas, this old man who's living by the banks of the River Anduin in Pen Arduin in Gondor, which is very close to Minas Tirith. I think it's just south of it. And at this time, like I mentioned, Middle Earth is nearly all memory of Sauron's threat and evil is lost. But Borlas is one of the very few that could recall such times as in like the horrible times, I guess. Most of the story is a conversation between Borlas and a man named Ceylon, who once stole an apple from Borlas's garden many years ago when he was just a young lad and he was friends with Borlas's son, to which Borlas had described at the time as orc's work, which really stuck with Ceylon. Yeah, he was like, he was kind of bummed out by this, but never forgiven. In their conversation, Borlas talks about a dark tree, which is sort of a metaphor for evil or like some sort of dark cult. And he describes that you can cut down the tree, but its roots remain, so it can rise again if it's left unchecked or unwatched. So Ceylon mentions that he remembers Borlas's insult of him years and years ago, describing him as doing orcs work. But later, him and his friends would play and pretend to be orcs. So this is kind of the world that we live in at the moment. Orcs clearly aren't thought about in a fearful way whatsoever, but they're kind of, made fun of, mocked and whatever. But it is obvious that the younger generation, like the Gen Z, I suppose, of Middle Earth, they clearly have no memory or respect for the aftermath of what went down before, of the War of the Ring. So, when you get modern day people talking about like army men, and then you get like army men that fought in World War II, and they're like, back in my day, no, you wouldn't have any of that. So this is what I imagine is going down here. So Ceylon seems to despise Borlas, as he mentions that he and his friends had once considered cutting down one of Borlas's trees from his orchard to make him think that orcs had returned, just to scare Borlas. So it's quite horrible. Poor old Borlas, he's just an old man. They then go on...
Young scallywags, just upsetting older men.
Scoundrel.
Not on.
Yeah, so they then go on to discuss, this is where it kind of gets really philosophical, I suppose. They discuss the morality between stealing an apple that is ripe and one that isn't. Are they both the same? Is it worse to steal an apple that isn't ripe, as you're basically preventing the world from the potential good of this apple? So, we've talked before on other podcasts how Tolkien, he claims that he's absolutely does not use any allegory, but to me, this really sounds like, Tolkien's presumed beliefs on maybe abortion or something of that nature. Just, I don't want to get too deep or, philosophical about it.
Do you not think it's Tolkien just talking about an apple? Like, because I could totally believe that as well. Tolkien, like, obsessed with trees and nature and stuff. And
of course, saying, but
you're robbing
like
the world
good.
Of the beauty and the good of this apple. Did you know?
Yeah. I suppose.
I mean, if it was any other author, I'd be all on board with saying, yeah, it's definitely allegorical, and he's talking about, it could be like what you're saying. But when it's Tolkien, I'm like, you could just be talking about an apple.
I know, yeah, you're probably right, and sure, look, maybe we'll get onto it, but maybe this is like part of the reason why he scrapped it. Maybe he was like, oh look, I don't want to be too allegorical about anything. So, anyways, back to Ceylon and Borlas. Ceylon goes on to talk about whether a tree would view a man or an orc any differently for the reasons they would cut them down. What would make the man's motivations any better than the orcs when at the end of the day they are both just killing a tree? And Borlas responds with a quite insightful view of how evil had entered the world through the discord of Melkor, whereas men came afterwards through the holy creation of Erelúvatar, the One. And men were his children and were given the right to use trees without pride or want. Men would cut down trees to warm their children, whereas orcs cut down trees out of want and destruction. Now,
sometimes they were building an army, and they needed fuel to feed the fire, and they were like trying to
the orcs,
like
of course,
steal and stuff. So they were being industrial with it. It wasn't just burn it down and just.
But they loved it. Like men probably. Well, I know if an elf had to cut down a tree, they'd be like licking the tree before and be like, "I'm so sorry." But an orc is probably like, "We need to chop down 3 trees, but let's just do 10 for good measure." Just because I want to.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Who knows? But no, you're probably right. They definitely would spit on the tree before they chop it down. The orcs.
Not in a sexual way, but yeah, definitely. So it's at this point where a mysterious name pops up in the conversation as things start to take a turn. So you kind of alluded to something similar to this. Well, I'm going to give you credit for it anyways, but
thank you.
So this is a quote from the book. So Ceylon says, quote, we have hardly begun. It was not of your orchard, nor your apples, nor of me that you were thinking when you spoke of the re-arising of the dark tree. What you were thinking of, Master Borlas, I can guess none the less. I have eyes and ears, and other senses, Master. His voice sank low and could scarcely be heard above the murmur of a sudden chill wind in the leaves as the sun sank behind Mindalluin. You have heard, then, the name? With hardly more than a breath he formed it. Of Heramor? Borlas looked at him with amazement and fear. His mouth made tremulous motions of speech, but no sound came from it. I see that you have, said Celan, and you seem astonished to learn that I have heard it also. But you are not more astonished than I was to see that his name has reached you too. For as I say, I have keen eyes and ears, but yours are now dim even for daily use, and the matter that has kept as secret as cunning could contrive. Whose cunning? Said Borlas, suddenly and fiercely. The sight of his eyes might be dim, but they blaze now with anger. Why, those who have heard the call of his name, of course, answered Celan, unperturbed. They are not many yet to set against all the people of Gondor, but the number is growing. Not all are content since the great king died, and fewer now are afraid. So, there we go. We have, that was hard to say the word unperturbed. That always trips me up. But yeah, we get this new mysterious character called Heramor that's mentioned in the mix. And yeah, he seems
that's cool. It kind of, sorry to interrupt, I got like a strong flashback of before the Rings of Power series started, when we'd like seen some of the trailers, and you get to see the your man, I've forgotten his name now, the older guy, Waldreg, sorry, was his name, and he goes up to Theo and he's like, "Have you heard of him, lad? Have you heard of Sauron?" And it's like I remember being really excited to see that storyline develop of the kind of these people that lived in the Southlands, and some of them heard about, you know, this character of Sauron, and like maybe they were going to start to follow him, and there was kind of like this legend or this powerful person. Maybe he's a god, maybe he's whatever. And I think that's kind of like, that was a cool story. Well, I mean, I don't think it really gave me everything that I wanted in the end after seeing the show, but I remember at that time being thinking, oh, it's going to be cool to see this over and back of like, who is Sauron? How is he going to get like this kind of cult following and people to come and like worship him and stuff? Maybe we'll get to see more of that later on in further seasons. But it kind of reminded me of that part there when you were saying like this.
Definitely.
Guy, like, have you heard of this name? Like, as in that time in Middle Earth when we saw the Rings of Power, the name Sauron was just not a name that was known to the people in that land. Obviously, people like Galadriel knew the name, but most of Middle Earth would have just not even known who that name was if you weren't an elf, for example, and like really long living. So that's kind of cool here as well, where they kind of like both of them know this name that's like this. It's got this evil connotation, and they're like, "Oh no, I can't believe you know that name as well," and stuff. So.
No, that's absolutely bang on, because I didn't pick that up when I was reading it, but he actually says, "You have heard then the name," which is almost like, "Have you heard of him?"
Exactly.
But of Heramor, and it just sounds, I don't know, it sounds so evil in the tongue, I suppose. So this mysterious character, Heramor's, he's mentioned, and it seems to have riled up Borlas, and then both men kind of start to question each other, but you know, they're going easy. They're holding all the cards to the chest. They're not trying to reveal too much about themselves or where their allegiances lie. So Borlas asks, quote, "But what is the call? What would they do?" he cried, laying his hand on the young man's knee. "I will ask you a question first before I answer yours," said Celan. And now he looked searchingly at the old man. "How have you, who sit here in the Emin Arnen and seldom go now even to the city, how have you heard the whispers of this name?" So again, we're going back to, it's an evil name. It's kind of like, again, in Harry Potter, they don't even say the name Voldemort. They just say the one who can't be named or something along those lines. So I just like how it's almost like Sauron. It's got evil connotations to it, like you just hinted at there. So, and also, I just want to say a side note, actually, in the book, The Peoples of Middle Earth, it's cool. They have... on this whole passage, or the 13 pages, they've got loads of little notes, or they've got numbers beside them, and if you actually read the small notes, one of them says that in the Silmarillion, the chapter of the Rings of Power and the Third Age, we learned that there was actually another character in Tolkien's writings named Heramor, and he was among those Númenóreans who sailed east from Númenor to establish fortresses and dwellings along the coast during Sauron's stay in Númenor. So he was actually one of the black Númenóreans that rose to power in the late Second Age, amongst the Haradrim. So he was all the way out there in the east, or in the southeast, and the name Herimor actually means Black Lord. So now I don't think this is the same Herimor. I assume this guy is dead.
No, probably not.
Probably not, yeah. But anyways, so we're nearly at the end of this whole exchange between the two men. Ceylon finishes by telling Borlus that if he wants to learn more, quote, I will meet you at your eastern gate behind your house, or at least I shall pass that way as soon as it is full dark, and you shall come, or not, as you will. I shall be clad in black, and anyone who goes with me must be clad alike. So, again, it sounds very culty here. Do you know, I heard Dad, our own dad, your and my dad, mine and your dad. I heard him the other day. We were talking about cults. This is only last night, and he said, "This sounds very Irish," but he said, "Yeah, that sounds very cultish now." And like, I had to take a step back, and I was like, "Sorry, what?"
Dad, would you mind your mouth?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of an inside joke between Irish people and myself and Johnny here, but thought it was quite funny. So anyways, we're nearing the end of this whole chapter, but Borlus, alone with his thoughts, thinks back to an earlier conversation that he had with his own son, where his son Berilach mentioned that fellow shipmen had gone... fellowship. I never really put those two together.
Oh.
Fellow shipmen had gone missing, and even a Gondorian ship...
Fellowshipmen,
yeah. So the Fellowship men had gone missing, and even a Gondorian ship was lost, and it was just kind of assumed that they were sunken and the men were drowned. But Borlus remembers how he had talked to Ceylon, and Ceylon had basically said that there was no recent storms. These men should be skilled because they're sons of fishermen. So things didn't add up. There was people in Middle Earth going missing. What's going on? So Borlus debates internally what he should do. Should he stay? Should he go? Should I stay or should I go?
There's all this kind of mayhem. People are waking up. They're like, I've lost one sock. I can only find the other one. What's going on here?
Every time I put one in the wash.
Exactly. It's like, just things aren't adding up. Some weird stuff is afoot.
That's like whenever our mom enters a room and she's like, where did my phone go? Who took my phone? It's missing. You're like, Mom, it's in your hand. But yeah, that's the kind of crazy stuff that's going on here. So Borlus is debating all these questions within himself. He's like, should I go? Is he trying to recruit me for, to combat this evil? Or will Ceylon actually lead him to a disappearance just like the shipmen? Or perhaps he's trying to tempt and convert Borlus into this darkness. But that would be kind of useless because knowing what Borlus knows, he's one of the few men that remembers the evil of Sauron. So blah, blah, blah. Now, this is where it starts to get spooky. This is the end of the story. This is where I think it gives me chills. Borlus eventually decides that, I'm going to go and I'm going to meet Ceylon at my own house, or near, just outside my house in another little small hut or something. But he's constantly questioning himself the whole time. And I'd like to read how it ends, because these are the last words that Tolkien wrote about this unfinished book. And I think it's quite chilling. Borlus says, quote, perhaps I have been preserved so long for this purpose, that one should still live, hale in mind, who remembers what went before the great peace. Scent has a long memory. I think I could still smell the old evil, and know it for what it is. The door under the porch was open, but the house behind was darkling. There seemed none of the accustomed sounds of the evening, only a soft silence, a dead silence. He entered, wondering a little. He called, but there was no answer. He halted in the narrow passage that ran through the house, and it seemed that he was wrapped in a blackness. Not a glimmer of twilight of the world outside remained there. Suddenly, he smelt it. Or so it seemed, though it came as it were from within outwards to the sense. He smelt the old evil, and he knew it for what it was.
Whew. Oh, class. Can you read that part again? He's... Feck. There's towards this. Sorry. He knew it for... No, not before. He knew it for what it was. Go back there a bit there.
Okay. So he says... So it says, he entered, wondering a little. He called, but there was no answer. He halted in the narrow passage that ran through the house, and it seemed that he was wrapped in a blackness. Not a glimmer of twilight of the world outside remained there. Suddenly he smelt it. Or so it seemed.
This part now. This part.
Though
Or so it seemed.
Or so it seemed, though it came as it were from within outwards to the sense. He
Exactly.
smelt
Just
the old evil.
repeat that line there. Though it came as it seemed, or whatever.
Though it came as it were from within outwards to the sense.
That's class.
Yeah, it is cool. Also, I have that written down, and there's like a one of those blue squiggly lines saying it's supposed to be within two, but I'm like, shut up. Tolkien wrote this.
Yeah,
it's correct.
They're like,
But-
are you sure about your grabber? And you're like, are you sure about your
Yeah, are you sure, you stupid computer? You haven't been around as long as Tolkien. But yeah, that last line of he smelt the old evil. I just love the way he first begins by saying, scent has a long memory. I think I could still smell the old evil and know it for what it is. And then it ends by saying, he smelt the old evil and he knew it for what it was. And I still get like these goose pimples on my arm when I'm reading it. But it's kind of spooky, and I really wish we got more. But this is how it ends. That's the last line of the book. The end. The new shadow or the old shadow or whatever. But yeah,
It's a short story.
it's a short story. But what a chilling end to just an insight into what the sequel to the Lord of the Rings would have looked like. So we're obviously left with so many questions. Of course, who is this Herimor guy? What happened to the mysterious missing Gondorian boat and sailors? Ceylon as well. He's also quite mysterious. Was he really part of this new evil dark cult, or was he just like, someone with a bit of information? Was he a spy perhaps? And what the hell was this dark tree cult all about? I assume it's the dark tree is probably an opposite metaphor of the white tree of Gondor.
White tree, sure.
And of course then what happened to Borlus? He enters the house, he calls out, and there's no response, and suddenly he smells the old evil. What happened? Does he die?
It's so cool. It's so cool that I had a kind of, before we started this episode, I had a slight memory of something like that. I remember just there being some sort of evil character, some evil was returning to Middle Earth, but I kind of had forgotten all about it. So when you said that again, I was just like getting those kind of chills down my spine, going, "Oh, I remember this." It's like when you hear a story that you haven't heard for a very long time, and you're kind of going, "There's some part of my mind that this is like reminiscent to," and there's another part of my mind that is like, it's like I'm hearing it for the first time as well.
Yeah.
So it was cool.
The other part of your mind is like, I don't remember.
No. That's cool. That's very, very cool. I don't know what could possibly happen after that. I mean, maybe that's the reason Tolkien left it there, because he probably tried a few different storylines after that. And just couldn't find something that was going right for him, and just sort of got fed up and moved on.
Well, I was going to, my next question that I was going to put to you was, why do you think that Tolkien didn't finish or even properly begin the sequel, The New Shadow? Why do you think that is? Because there is kind of a reason to it. Like, Tolkien does talk about it in a later comment, but I just want to see what your thoughts are from what we know of this story.
Is it a story reason, or is it... I was going to say that maybe just stuff got in the way, like as in other writings or things like that. Like you said, this was...
That's when he started blowing up on TikTok, and then he just like took his career in another direction altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. This it's kind of story related. Yeah, it's because of the text.
Maybe because the Fourth Age is supposed to, like, as in when the end of the Third Age, that's supposed to be when the world of men take over. And obviously, if people aren't aware that Tolkien, the way he wrote about Middle Earth, it's not a fantasy world. It's not a different world like, I don't know, in Star Wars or something, or
Game
whatever.
of Thrones.
It's not like Game of Thrones. It's supposed to be the history of our world, where we live now. So the Fourth Age, the beginning of men, was like, that would be... like they would be our distant relatives, I suppose. And so maybe he just thought that like it wouldn't make sense to have this like new evil coming in, because then that might just it probably seems like a better ending to the original story, where all the evil gets wiped out and all of the other, like the dwarves disappear, the elves leave for Valinor, and we don't really hear too much about the hobbits. I know that in like one of the cartoons we see that the hobbits just kind of grow into men as well, which is a bit weird.
Yeah,
but
they just like become men, I suppose.
Yeah,
each generation gets taller and taller. I
suppose they were getting taller. That was in Ralph Bakshi. No, that was in
the Rankin Bass was it? Yeah.
Rankin Bass one, yeah. So they obviously it was saying like that they got taller after a while, and then they'd probably like I was gonna say crossbreed. That sounds so weird. I mean, just like get into like interracial marriages, I suppose, between men and hobbits and stuff like that, and then eventually they would kind of just become one peoples. So maybe is that anywhere in the right direction where you would say it wouldn't make sense to be like because obviously the ultimate end of Tolkien's story is our life now.
Kinda. Like.
Am I going way to like
no, but like no, you're kind of right with two things because obviously what you're saying is correct about that's got nothing to do with the reason why he ended the book. The whole thing about this being English mythology, I suppose, and yeah, I've heard that a good few times where this is kind of in Tolkien's mind set thousands of years ago in our own time. Or in our own world, but that's not the actual reason he gives, but you still kind of touched on it. I'm just gonna read a quote from Tolkien himself, the great man, and what he says about this sequel is, quote, "I did begin a story placed about 100 years after the downfall, but it proved both sinister and depressing. Since we are dealing with men, it is inevitable that we should be concerned with the most regrettable feature of their nature, their quick satiety with good, so that the people of Gondor in times of peace, justice, and prosperity would become discontented and restless, while the dynasties descended from Aragorn would become just kings and governors, like Denethor or worse. I found that even so early there was an outcrop of revolutionary plots, about a centre of secret satanistic religion, while Gondorian boys were playing at being orcs and going around doing damage. I could have written a thriller about the plot and its discovery and overthrow, but it would just have been that, not worth doing." So basically, to sum up what Tolkien is trying to say there, so Tolkien, he probably knew that it would be too depressing to showcase a new evil, especially after such a tremendous victory over Sauron. I wanted to ask you, Johnny, as well. Can you think of a modern example where a franchise probably over-milked the same cow, as it were?
Star Wars?
Yeah, well done, yeah. How so?
I mean, bringing back Palpatine.
Yeah.
I suppose that was just ridiculous. Like, if any of our listeners are fans of the what's it called? Is it just called the new trilogy, or is there
the sequel trilogy, I suppose.
Sequel trilogy, yeah. People are fans of that. I mean, that's fine. There's definitely elements from all those movies that I enjoyed, but I have to say the last movie, I was just like, this is the biggest pile of shit I've ever seen. It's the whole way through it. I was like, this is terrible. And then when I finally saw the big real Palpatine, I was like, oh, that's it. Like, I mean, what have they done? What have they done to our baby?
So annoying, because I remember actually being with you in Spain, like 2 years before the movie came out, maybe it was a year before the movie came out, and the trailer dropped, and there was a big trailer of whatever was going on, didn't reveal much, and then just before the title came up of like The Rise of Skywalker, you heard that and you hear like Palpatine's laugh, and you're like, oh, cool, how is this going to work? What's going to happen? And you were anticipating how they were going to bring back one of the biggest villains of all time, and they just explained it with one simple line, 3 words: somehow Palpatine returned. And that was it. We didn't get to hear like, how's he alive? Like, what's going on? So
they could have even just said it was like some means that are unnatural,
yeah,
or something like that. Like, that even would have been better.
Well, they did. He did kind of. Palpatine himself. He does say that himself. He says something about like the dark side of the Force, and something
dark side,
something complete. But yeah, so yeah, we know how Star Wars audience felt about Darth Sidious's return. It basically makes his defeat in the original trilogy and the climax less earned and pointless, and I imagine that this is what Tolkien feels too. And I certainly commend him.
Vader's arc, in terms of how he overcame Palpatine and overcame Darth Sidious, and eventually, cast him down into that chasm and defeated him. And it just kind of makes his whole story arc just like invalid, I suppose. And just kind of, well, actually, you didn't defeat him. He just came back. He's fine. So
and the whole thing with the whole thing with Rey as well. Anakin is the chosen one. And then it's just like, well, actually, Rey is the chosen one. She's the one that eventually does kill Palpatine. It's just kind of weird because the chosen one, the whole prophecy of Anakin, going to the Sith and then becoming who he was.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of, in hindsight, there was a lot of mistakes in the story room, but I certainly can commend.
I was going to say, like, we should commend Tolkien for noticing that and being like, I could make a bestseller here and I could make more money off it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But he realized that that's actually, that doesn't exist anymore, I suppose, nowadays, where a writer can see this. I have a great plot or initial, beginnings of a story here that could be really interesting. It could be an exciting thriller, and it would, it won't be a bad story. I can definitely make it a good story.
Yeah,
but
could have been very enjoyable.
Make loads of money, and but in terms of how would it fit into the entire world that he's already created, and he's like, actually, you know what? It's better that I just don't continue with this story. So that's really commendable and something that, as I said, is lost on the modern studios.
Yeah.
On maybe any sort of Disney or Marvel studios that are making their new stuff at the moment. But we won't go down that road anymore. We won't harp on that. But there's definitely we're not going to hate on Star Wars on Disney or on Marvel because if anybody knows Dave and I, we are big fans of all that world as well. So definitely enjoy it. But kudos to Tolkien for realizing not to cash in on this I suppose this money cow.
Yeah, and we're such big massive fans of both Star Wars and Marvel, but everything has their flaws. I just still like those things more than other things, but the best thing about Tolkien is there are no flaws. It's all perfect. It's like literally
it's completely perfect.
It's just perfect. So and he shows an incredible amount of restraint not writing this sequel, which probably would have been class. And I'm already so intrigued about this tiny little conversation between two characters. I really want to know what happens, but I guess we never will know. But I just want to say as well, Tolkien in his Catholic upbringing could see that human beings are fundamentally flawed and they're easily tempted by evil, like we see with his characters such as Boromir and Isildur. Tolkien was always very careful not to portray his own views on his work, unlike his friend C.S. Lewis, who he obviously has a more allegorical message, I suppose, in his writings. Narnia, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was basically like, Jesus' sacrifice and Christianity and all that mumbo jumbo. But Tolkien, he wanted his works to be for everyone, and he simply could not persist with this sequel, and that is why he chose not to write it. So there you have it. And it is true because, you might have some people, maybe staunch atheists, that will pick up Narnia, or the mother might pick it up and go, I've heard about this guy and I know exactly what he's putting in here and don't want to be brainwashing my children. Because like I had the opposite effect when I was a kid, and Mum, I wanted to read this book called The Golden Compass, and it was a big fantasy book, and Mum found out that it was written by someone who was like a staunch atheist. And they had put lots of allegorical messages in there, and things to make you think this way and that way. And she was like, "No, that is a no-no
in our house."
Yeah, and I got a clip around the ear, and I got bet with the wooden spoon just for thinking of it. But yeah, there you have it.
The way Christ would have done himself.
So I do have another thing. It's completely nothing to do with this unfinished sequel, but. Yeah, I think we have time for a little mini story.
Oh, a little story.
A little story. Off. Yeah, but first of all, before we talk about this little thing, if anyone wants to ask us any questions about the unfinished sequel, or if you have any little anecdotes yourself or any cool facts, send them in to us at Mellon_Heads on Twitter, or any of our other socials. You can find us there, or comment on YouTube, please. We'd love.
And while you're doing that, exactly, leave us a comment, leave us a like, and please subscribe and tell your friends.
And tell your mom to tell her friends. I'm already friends with your mom and her friends. Just kidding. So yeah, even though I find this little mini story between Borlas and Ceylon very captivating and intriguing, I basically broke it all down there in, maybe about a page or a page and a half, but it is actually slow and depressing. And I thought I'd like to lighten the mood a little bit and finish off with something that, Johnny, you may not have ever heard of. But, oh no, actually, I mentioned this to you before, and I said I might bring it up at a podcast sometime, so you will have heard of it. So,
I listened to you, though? That is the question.
No, you mightn't remember once I bring up the name. So there was a man named John Boorman who wrote a Lord of the Rings adaptation in 1970. So, do you know of this adaptation? No? Right, well...
Not ringing any bells, no.
Right, so some bells are going to be rang fairly soon, I think, when I get into it. But, excuse me. John Boorman, he had a script for a live-action Lord of the Rings that was supposed to come out in 1970, or that's when it was being created. But thankfully, it was never created because it is the weirdest thing you will ever read. But
I think this. Yeah, I'm starting to get those bells. But did you say that it was a script for a movie? Sorry, is that what you said?
Script for a movie, a live action movie.
I think I misheard you. I thought you said a book or something. Okay, so a live action movie. Okay.
No, it was never made, but there are a full 173 page script. It exists, and it was supposed to be written for a 3-hour long adaptation of the entire trilogy.
Was there like some really kind of weird, kind of raunchy, unusual parts in it? Yeah, okay, all right. So yes, the bells are well and truly ringing right now.
Right, the bells are ringing. Yeah. So I have basically you can find the script out there. There was 173 pages. I didn't look through it all. I only went back to like check out some of the scenes that I'm going to touch on here. But anyways, I've paraphrased basically what a man named Daniel Stride writes in his blog entitled "From Magic Mushrooms to Morannon: The John Boorman Script of The Lord of the Rings, 1970." So let's get into it. Don't worry, this won't be long. He says, well, one need look no further than Gandalf. We actually see Boorman's Gandalf tauntingly encourage Boromir to take the ring at one point. We see him psychologically bullying Bilbo. We see him literally abusing Gimli before the doors of Moria to awaken quote-unquote ancestral memories. So it tends to get even worse as the story goes on. The first half of the script more or less aligns with the Fellowship of the Ring. And now I'm saying more or less because in that while the earlier sections are still recognizably the Lord of the Rings, they are completely weird and crazy. Gandalf, for some unknown reason, does not have a single excuse not to accompany Frodo to Rivendell. The Hobbit's consumption of mushrooms takes on a clear psychedelic twist. It is Sam, not Tom Bombadil, who sings the willow to sleep. The ring wraiths literally dissolve in water, like the Wicked Witch of the West. And
like Disprin.
Like Disprin. And that's just before ignoring the characterization of Merry. Merry, of all people, is the overweight and clueless comic relief. So there you have it. A couple of other things that happen in the script that get weirder and weirder. So rather than a prologue, just like Ralph Bakshi's or Peter Jackson's, we get treated to expositional symbolic play at Rivendell. Do you know the way I think they do it in Game of Thrones?
Oh, right, okay.
One of those kind of things. Arwen.
And it's done in Thor as well.
Yes, yeah, with like Matt Damon. Yeah. So Arwen in this story is actually only 13 years old for some reason, but don't worry, she doesn't end up with Aragorn. He that's not his love interest. That honor actually goes to Éowyn. Instead, Boorman ramps up the magical element of the elves, so Arwen and Elrond are able to keep track of the Fellowship and provide weird kind of voiceovers. The exception to the magical elves, of course, is Legolas, whom the script seems to completely forget is an actual elf at sometimes, because he refers to the last of the fair people leaving at the Grey Havens when he's not going anywhere. So that's another weird thing. We also have Boorman has him rescue the Fellowship. Boorman has Gandalf rescue the Fellowship from the wargs via encasing himself and his companions in ice, which is kind of strange. And also before the doors of Durin, he physically forces poor Gimli into a little hole to get the password out of him, which is bizarre. And also, since Narsil is not reforged until Minas Tirith, Aragorn and Boromir wind up sharing the shards until Boromir's death. So that's weird as well. I can't imagine, Aragorn.
What that would add to the story as well.
Yeah. Okay, so another weird...
Also, it's so that's weird. So Narsil, that's similar to Peter Jackson's. It's not forged until Minas Tirith.
Yeah.
Whereas in the books, I mean, that's weird that he would go along that line as well, because it's not like, oh, of course, because like in the material that he would have had back in the 70s would have been Tolkien's writings, which was Narsil was reforged in Rivendell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So unusual, and
before that, Aragorn doesn't even really have a sword, does he? He just has like a shtick.
Oh, in the book, he has he carries around the hilt of
Narsil,
of the sword.
But like the other way before we actually get to.
But he carries around the hilt and like the small the little part of the blade before it's broken. Like, but he's like, look at my sword. It's like
he doesn't really need to use it.
It's like
whereas
4 inches
in the films, if he has so much action before he gets to the reforging of the blade, so it just wouldn't have made sense, which is funny. But now probably the weirdest part of the book is Galadriel is a seductive lakeside dwelling sorceress whom the Fellowship are, let's say, interested in. And yes, in that way, every single one of the Fellowship is like lusting after Galadriel. And despite the best efforts of everyone else, including Boromir, she ends up having sex with Frodo Baggins. And incidentally, Pippin reveals this later on to Denethor that Galadriel basically boinked Frodo and not Boromir. And this does not help the steward's mood later on. He's like, it should have been Boromir. So I actually, when I read this in the blog, I wanted to go to the script and find the exact quote from the script. So what it reads is, accepting the invitation. This is talking about Frodo, by the way. Accepting the invitation, his eyes wandered over her body, drinking in its loveliness. Galadriel's austere and aloof features soften. Galadriel's hand touches the chain from which the ring dangles as Frodo's hand takes hers. Frodo again looks deep into the reflection in the basin and sees their two faces come together and kiss. And then it does switch to another scene, so you can see that the raunchy part is off camera, but it later goes back. I didn't want to, keep quoting it, but it later goes back and they're like lying together naked in a boat or something, and she's like rubbing his chest, and it's just so
when you're talking about like, that's so mad. Also, I think it's funny when you're talking about a sex scene and you just said that Galadriel touched something that was dangling.
Yeah.
So I was like, that's a strange word to use. That did she touch something that was dangling later on?
But like, this is the direction. This isn't like, this isn't anyone saying anything in the script. This is just direction. But it sounds like he could be an erotic novelist. This John Boorman. But yeah, that's probably the weirdest part. But anyways, I'll read out the last couple of notes here that I have.
What about Gollum? What was the character of Gollum like?
Again, I didn't read the script. There was nothing on Gollum from this guy's summation of everything. But just to quickly gloss over everything else, the entire Isengard plotline is cut. So it's goodbye to the Ents and goodbye to Helm's Deep. None of that is in there. Saruman takes the place of the mouth of Sauron at the Morannon. So he's not really in the story at all. He just pops up at the end. At Minas Tirith, Theoden leads the Rohirrim down. Legolas brings 3 elves. Gimli brings dwarves, and Aragorn, apart from fighting with the 2 shards of Narsil in each hand, he's a straight-out necromancer, summoning the dead from a graveyard with no explanation whatsoever. There's none of this like Oathbreakers explanation. It's just, he's a necromancer. There is no Faramir, so Denethor's fixation on the loss of Boromir is arguably more understandable. Rather than burning himself at a pyre, Denethor's suicide weirdly enough involves him holding a dagger to his heart as he embraces Aragorn. Again, these just sound like unnecessary, weird changes for no reason. And Aragorn in the Corsair ships. That scene that doesn't happen at all. That's actually replaced with Aragorn and his forces camouflaging themselves as a giant snake. So that sounds like something you see in pantomime or something,
or Monty Python.
Yeah, Monty Python. Or like, when the Chinese
if we built a giant
New Year.
badger.
What? Oh my god, that scene is so funny.
What now? And now we climb out of the rabbit. Lancelot, Galahad, and I.
Jesus Christ. So
who climbs out?
Well, Lancelot and I.
Yeah.
What happens now? Well, now, Lancelot, Galahad, and I wait until nightfall and then leap out of the rabbit, taking the French by surprise. Not only by surprise, but totally unarmed.
Who leaps out?
Lancelot, Galahad, and I leap out of the rabbit Look, if we built this large wooden badger...
So the orcs, they are basically part reptilian and part bird-like, apparently. The Ent demolition of Isengard is sort of paid tribute here when a random tree decides to take down the wall of Mordor by itself, granting Frodo and Sam a way in. And after the destruction of the ring, everyone, including the orcs, basically decide to go home. It was all just a big war, and they're like, all right, let's go home. And Saruman apparently pursues a career of small-time con man. So there's no scouring of the Shire. He's just like, right, I'm just going to pickpocket people in the streets or whatever.
All right.
And then finally, Legolas and Gimli are the ones to say farewell beside the sea, and not the hobbits. So there you have it. That's a summary of what could have been, and thank God it didn't, because seeing as Tolkien himself would have been alive at this time, this is supposed to be 1970. Tolkien died in 1973, so goodness knows what he would have thought.
My God, can you imagine?
So you can count your lucky stars, folks, that we didn't get this adaptation. People are complaining about the Rings of Power, but oh my God, it could have been so much worse. Could have been so
Could you
bad.
imagine that came out this year with Twitter as well?
Oh God. Twitter seems to be going down completely now. I'm afraid that we're going to lose all of our lovely followers. By the way, guys, if you're following us on Twitter, I've put it up a good few times. It could be going down this week, so please subscribe to us on YouTube and subscribe to our podcast. But also check out we're big on Instagram, and if Twitter goes bust, that's where we'll be posting everything. Also check us out on TikTok and Facebook and all the lovely stuff, and Patreon if you're one of those kind of people. We'd love to see you there. But yeah, Johnny, any final notes before we conclude this episode?
No, not really. That was cool. As I said, it's always nice when you hear a story that you've definitely heard years before, and it's like two sides to your brain. One side is kind of like going, oh, Jesus, this sounds familiar. And the other side is kind of going, I don't remember this at all, so I'm just going to sit back, put up my feet, and drink it in. Yeah. And it's always nice to hear like a new story that, like any sort of a new Tolkien writing, it's always like a pleasure. So that was lovely. It was nice to hear that. And I remember you'd spoken to me before about this script from the 70s. That's just completely this sort of off the wall Lord of the Rings. So interesting. Yeah, nice to have a bit of a thank you for that fun little I don't know, completely
side quest
shift. Yeah, little side quest at the end of the podcast there, because as you said, the first story, it's kind of heavy. It's heavy stuff, but
it is heavy,
interesting as well.
But I think the reason that we were talking about the weird adaptation was because there are some, obviously it's very weird and stupid and should absolutely not have happened, but it was interesting in a way to see how someone would have adapted this huge story into just 3 hours. And, he had to make some changes like Peter Jackson did. And one of them was actually leaving out all of Helm's Deep and leaving out all of the trees, the Ents and Isengard. And it's interesting because the small part of the story that concerned men of the West, all they were doing was just gathering forces for the Battle of Minas Tirith. So it's just like, you can kind of understand. You can kind of take out all of Helm's Deep and just pretend like that didn't really happen. There's just going to be this one big battle, and that's what we're preparing for. So, if it's one movie, you can understand that he had to make.
Yeah, no, of course, and we should remember that in the books as well. That like Helm's Deep is a very minor part in the books as well. Like, I mean, we just know that
one chapter.
It's so huge in and not even a long chapter. So just because of the second movie, it was probably, how long is it? It's over an hour in terms of when the battle starts until the end of it. I think we have a full episode for people if you want to go back and check out our episode on the battle at Helm's Deep.
It's a good one.
It's a good episode. Go back and check that out. But I think in terms of screen time, it's a full hour from when that battle starts until when it ends. I think it shifts away and it shows parts of what Frodo's doing and all that kind of stuff, but there's over an hour of footage on that as well. So it's a huge chunk of that movie, and in terms of if you read the book, it's one small chapter in quite a long book, and there's loads going on. And in that book as well, we get like Shelob and all kinds of stuff as well, which Jackson put into the third movie. So I could definitely see that somebody could take that source material and think, oh, I'm just going to not bother with this battle because it's going to take up too much time and effort. So that's definitely not his worst decision compared to the other decisions that we saw. But interesting to say the least.
It's just interesting to see what his vision was, and I think yeah, that could have been an interesting but maybe smart choice if he had gone on along with it. Just to touch on Tolkien's unfinished story as well. I just thought I don't actually have the book The Peoples of Middle Earth, so I wasn't able to read it directly, so I was like going at secondary information. But then when I was getting into the story, I was like, all right, this sounds cool, I want to find like these quotes and stuff. So I ended up going and finding like some illegal PDF and downloading the thing and like reading it all, and I was fascinated because I'd already kind of read the story, but I was like, I don't really understand what's going on, or else I was watching videos and I was like, I still don't really know what's going on, and I wanted to get the actual direct quotes themselves, because
sure.
I watched a couple of videos and they had like some quotes, but I was like, I want to put all this in there because it's good stuff, and spine tingling. But
good man.
Yeah, guys, let us know which story you prefer to hear. Do you prefer Tolkien's one or John Boorman's one? And let us know. Let us know.
Put a poll up.
Yeah, we should do that. I don't know how that's going to go down.
I think we just get some trolls in there, just like in John. What's his name? John Durham?
John Boorman, I think.
Right.
Boorman. John Boorman. Yeah, there you go. And he was a boring man.
What's happening out there?
Shall I describe it to you? Or would you like me to find you a box?
So, folks, that's all we have time for today on the Council of Elrond. So I want to thank you all so much for listening and hopefully watching. And let us know what your thoughts on today's episode are by leaving a comment on YouTube, or you can tweet us again at Mellon_Heads. That is, if Twitter hasn't already imploded with Elon's takeover. But all of our social media links are in the podcast info section. Again, if you'd like to support myself and Johnny with these podcasts, you can sign up to our Patreon, where you'll get bonus discussions there and lots more little goodies. Thank you to all of our patrons that have already signed up, and a special thank you to Jack Knightley. We will see you all next week. So, guys, adios.
Cheerio.